Chase hit us up from Powder Springs, Georgia. Good people in Powder Springs. He said, why the lack of talk about Oregon as a national player this year? I strongly believe it's them and Utah for the Pac-12 and then a gap to everyone else. Not a large one, but a gap. Very interesting take on the Pac-12. You hear what he said there? He said Oregon and Utah and then a gap. And I'm like, what? There is no gap that places anyone that far ahead of USC or Washington out there. USC and Washington are at the forefront of any conversation in the Pac-12. Now, you want to throw Oregon in there, you want to throw Utah in there, be my guest. Those are easily the 4 teams that I would put in there. But, Chase, I checked the inventory, and we have not backed off talking about Oregon as a national player. Now, if you want to talk about the rest of the country, I don't particularly listen to a whole lot of the other shows. We don't have time. It's not disrespect. We just don't have time. But we have had Oregon smack dab in the middle of our conversation. I had Jesse kind of look up the odds to win the Pac-12 championship. This is from Caesars, by the way. USC number 1, Oregon number 2, Washington number 3. Oregon State has better odds than Utah, huh? With Jesse returning at quarterback for Utah under the surname Cam Rising. That's interesting. I had not seen that. So anyway, as you can see, so there are 5 teams. It's a 5-team group. Apologies for the disrespect to Oregon State there. So yeah, there is not an Oregon, Utah, and then a gap anywhere out there. Having said that, I think you're competing against the helmet sticker in the Pac-12. And that's not even unfounded. What I mean, obviously, is people look at you being a Pac-12 team and they don't take you seriously because the conference hasn't been a serious player on the national stage and the playoff spotlight for several years now. So you got to overcome that. Just because something hasn't happened the last few years doesn't mean it can't happen. We talk about that all the time. But you do have to overcome that stigma because you created the stigma. I really wonder about the future of the conference. We haven't talked about the whole media rights stuff because there's a little bit of a lull in that conversation right now, but we're following it just off camera. But I take Oregon seriously. I take Utah, Southern Cal, Oregon State, Washington. It would really blow a bunch of your minds, by the way, if Jonathan Smith or Kalen DeBoer had Washington or Oregon State in the playoff mix. I would just love it so much. But anyway, because I know you don't take them seriously. I know a lot of you don't, and it's okay because history has shown you shouldn't take the Pac-12 seriously. I happen to think it's a really good year for them this year, so then what does really good mean is the next question, and that's for August. But here's the question I ask about them. I think they've got some quality teams out there. Do they have some regardless teams, or do they have a bunch of depends-on teams? The regardless teams are like Georgia. Georgia can win the SEC regardless of what anyone else does, because if Georgia just does what they're supposed to, they're good enough to make it no matter what. And then you got some other teams that could make it, but they need some things to go their way. They need some other teams to be down. Those are the depends-on teams, not the diaper, but just the state of being. They depend on someone else being down. And then if some things open up, maybe if quarterback doesn't pan out at some of these big programs nationally, maybe they could sneak in the back door. I think there are several depends-on programs out there. I don't know if I readily identify any regardless of programs. No, we're talking about playoff. We're not just talking about winning the Pac-12. I have it on good authority. We are guaranteed to have one of those teams win the Pac-12 this year. It's just that they could be a 2-loss team when they do it. So if we're going to go anywhere above and beyond that, got to play better defense at Southern Cal. We've got to be more offensively dynamic at a couple of those places out there. We got to be healthy at Washington. Defensively, we've got to be a lot better at Oregon too. Listen, that's why we're going to play the season. If they have that, they have that. It doesn't matter that they haven't done it in the past. It just will be this year. I mean, if I were to tell you that TCU was going to make the playoff, you would have laughed at me because you would have said, oh, no team like that will ever make it. No team like that has made it. Then they did, right? So the Pac-12, it'll be, well, they can't do it. They can't do it until they do it. Here's what I'm watching with the Pac-12. And you didn't really ask me about this, Chase, but I'll just share what's on my mind. I was on Next Round Live in Birmingham earlier today, and we were talking about this. Because where else would you go other than Birmingham, Alabama, to talk about Pac-12 odds and ends? So we were talking about, I don't even remember what the impetus was for the conversation, but we got on the topic of Pac-12 coaches. And we got on this topic of what the future of the conference holds. And right now, the coaching market pretty much looks like this. A guy gets fired, and then there are the usual names in the hopper. Or you've got some hot commodities out there who are coordinators. Garrett Riley at Clemson is going to be this very soon, if not already. And so we know how it normally works. Here's what we have not seen. What we have not seen is a conference hurl itself into an era of volatility and unpredictability and unevenness, like the Pac-12 is on the precipice of doing, to the point where their good coaches just leave out of nowhere. And I'm looking at Dan Lanning at Oregon. If they keep ascending, but the Pac-12 is just thrust into a quagmire of uncertainty, or even like Jed Fish at Arizona, what if he keeps ascending? What if Jonathan Smith, Kalen DeBoer, what if those guys continue to run high-level programs out there, but they look around the conference and the stuff out of their control is really murky? It's like one of those college game day mornings when they're on the West Coast and it's before sunrise, and then the sun slowly starts to come up in the second hour of the show, and it's like foggy all over the place. You can't really see anything. That's what it feels like in the Pac-12 right now. I think about those coaches. Whomstever the quality coaches are out there. I wonder if we're headed towards, I hope we're not. Let me stop and say I hope we're not. But I wonder if we're headed towards an era where some of the best out there are at places that are historically really good. And historically, we know you can win there. Proud traditions, great fan bases, great places to live. Not the best conference to be in. That'd be a shame. And so therefore, I hope what I just said never actually comes to any kind of fruition.